There are a couple of things I think I want to just call out from that, because there are several topical elements, if you will, I think sets up our conversation. Examples like you referenced the skills differential. You know, the competencies their individuals are coming out of either this, high school or higher education and their readiness for work. You also talked about the 7 million job openings of individuals that don't possess the skills needed. You mentioned readiness overall and multiple pathways. You also mentioned affordability and access, employer engagement. Through all of this, there arguably are probably two kind of core themes. One is options, that has to translate into multiple pathways of how individuals traverse through learning pathways as they pursue opportunities. But even when we consider options, innovation is probably the operative term overall. And so I wanted to maybe just start by having you share with us your perspective as you consider the individual's journey, if you will, through that learning, and as that traverses into opportunities and work and how they may come back to learning, et cetera. Where do you see the kind of critical junctures where there's the greatest need for innovation, or areas that you think are the biggest opportunity for innovation?
Really important question, Scott, about where the opportunities for innovation are. And I would argue very simply, they are everywhere in education. When you step back and take a look at education as an industry as a whole, and we have to be honest and say education is an industry, it is the least disrupted and least changed of the industries in our nation. And that starts with K-12 education, where if you go into a classroom today, more often than not, it looks very much like a classroom photo of 100 years ago. If you went into a surgical suite today and looked at a photograph of 100 years ago, you would not really be able to understand you were looking at the same thing. And so the opportunities for innovation in K-12 education are numerous. I would contend that in order to foster that kind of necessary innovation, we have to have more freedom in education, more freedom to be able to choose and find the right fit for each child for their education. And that's why the Education Freedom Scholarships proposal that I mentioned, I think is really important. We can dive into that a little bit more later. But that's with regard to K-12 education. I think we should be thinking about and talking about education as a lifelong pursuit, not chunked into pieces of your life like K-12 education and then something post-secondarily and perhaps something later on. Our opportunities today are going to require, and for the future, are going to require constantly iterating and taking advantage of those new opportunities. So being able to get on and off the education highway, so to speak, easily, and at an off-ramp of your choosing and an on-ramp of your choosing, I think is going to be an imperative for the future. And I have to credit Western Governors and your leadership there in helping us see how that can be different for students that you're serving. And we need a lot more of that kind of innovation.
Yeah, let's maybe utilize your phrase there, education highway. I think some of us might call it things like the continual learning loop or lifelong learning, et cetera, but I think that's a good analogy because while we don't want to necessarily chunk it, meaning that we know individuals kind of go through this multiple times, it might help for us to just break it down by phases. So as we think, can we start maybe with K-12, and let's talk about some of those, and then we'll transition into post-secondary and what do the pathways look like there. But ultimately also the transition to work and the ongoing upskilling and new skilling that has to happen there. So beginning with the K-12 space, I think it's notable that Oren actually shared it earlier. He commented quite a bit about the nature of K-12, particularly high school education. And I'll ask it this way, is like, have we over-integrated the design of high school to basically be the outcome of high school is only matriculation to college? Is that what we've done? And if so, like, what are the ways we should be thinking about high school and K-12 education generally if that's not what we really should have as the outcome? Is like, oh, the measure can't only be, oh, did you matriculate to college?
Well, I think we've had a singular focus the last number of decades on preparing students to go to college, a traditional four-year college, really at the expense of other alternatives and other options. And we look at today the fact that there are millions of jobs that don't require a four-year degree, and yet there's nothing that has happened in high school that has really prepared those students for a meaningful career. I know anecdotally, and I know the data shows that there are way too many students who get into high school, don't see a relevance to the courses that they're taking, don't see themselves going to college, and yet really don't have a direction or don't feel a viable support for an alternative direction. Now, there are areas, there are regions, there are states that are looking at this differently today and are preparing with many more career and technical education opportunities. I think the conversations in the last couple of years around increasing the opportunities for apprenticeships is really important. And I reference often my trip last year to Switzerland, where I learned more about their system and was very surprised, pleasantly surprised to learn that about 70% of their high school students actually are in an apprenticeship of some sort. So they're earning while they're in high school, they're learning, and many of them they're either deciding whether they want to pursue that post-high school or they want to take another turn and do something else. But we have that opportunity to really develop those kinds of experiences here. And that, I think, is going to best happen, again, when we have more freedom to be able to find the right fit, and when employers and educators at a local, community, and regional level get together and solve the problems they have right there in their communities.
With that being said, so should we be thinking about the measures of success in secondary education differently? So many of the statistics you even shared are notable. We know that there are roughly 3.5 million individuals enrolled in high school today. They have about an 82% completion rate. About 2/3 of them matriculate to college, of which then 25+% drop in the first year. So even within 1 year of high school, half of the 19-year-olds aren't even in post-secondary. Maybe that should tell us something that isn't the path that we should be thinking about. So do we have to think differently then about the measures of high school success? To your point of learnings from Switzerland, should we be thinking about even that as a first step to opportunities? Like maybe the right outcomes are you employable? Do you have skills and competencies needed? Versus are you matriculated to college?
Well, I do think that there is a huge opportunity for high schools to prepare students in a much more robust and meaningful way for whatever they choose to do post high school. And again, talking to employers across the country, students that either go to college for a short time and don't complete, or those who come out of high school and decide to get a job immediately after high school, many of them are not prepared with just the basic skills, the soft skills, and the problem-solving skills that are necessary for any kind of a meaningful career. And so there is I think, an imperative that schools begin to think differently about how they're preparing students in high school to be prepared for a variety of those options.
I suspect that we'll see some of these measures become real again, because if you think about apprenticeship as like what was old, meaning it was very much an 1800s convention of post-secondary, is like you went into apprenticeships. I think that work-based learning may become something that's very much a pathway straight out of secondary education, et cetera. Now, having said that, maybe we utilize as a segue transition to some of the higher ed considerations, because I'll take this data point I just shared, which is 2/3 of high school graduates matriculate to post-secondary education, but 26% of those drop in the first year. So half of your 19-year-olds are already outside of education. There was data shared earlier that also highlighted there is there's a significant difference between the opportunities afforded those who have some post-secondary credential versus only high school. So there's no doubt that the economic outcome is still favoring those who have post-secondary credentialing. So if these high school graduates aren't readied for post-secondary, how should higher ed institutions be thinking about readiness? Or is K-12 the only one supposed to be solving that problem? Is there a way to kind of better collaborate between higher ed institutions and high schools to increase that success and readiness on-ramp into post-secondary?
Well, I do think there's a great opportunity, and we're seeing more and more focus around dual enrollment, early college opportunities. And again, I think this is a huge opportunity for higher ed institutions to really partner with K-12 institutions and think about what the needs are in that region or that community, and how the students in high school might be better prepared to make a wide range of choices and decisions if they do have that early college experience through dual enrollment and or work-based learning. And again, I think that having more freedom to create some of these opportunities is really part of the imperative.